Hey everybody, it's Marshall Monkey here, and this is going to be my Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker movie review. There is so much to talk about with this movie. There's a lot. I mean, there's really a lot. But you guys know how these reviews work. The first half is going to be non-spoilers. The second half will be spoilers. I will warn you when spoilers are coming up. So for now, just enjoy the non-spoiler half if you haven't seen the movie but want to know a little bit about what you're getting into, because there's a lot to talk about. Okay, so I'm going to give you my first impression of the film in just this one sentence. So Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, I almost said Last Jedi there for a second. The Rise of Skywalker is desperate, obvious, incoherent with certain things that should have been coherent, right? Incohesive, I guess. And very disjointed and very aggravating and disrespectful. I think those are the big ones. But I think, and inorganic. I think that's a huge one too. It's inorganic. But the three big ones for me are obvious, desperate, and inorganic. Those are the three big adjectives that I like to use when I describe the bad parts of this film. Now, don't get me wrong. There are good parts of this movie. And when the good parts are good, they're really good. But overall, I just think that this movie has so many problems, especially when wrapping up a trilogy, that it's just too big to ignore at this point. I think that if you do like Star Wars, if you are a Star Wars fan, you should see this movie because it does wrap up this trilogy nicely. The First Order stuff wraps that up really well. So I would go see it for that reason. But if you're like, you know what should we go see for our holiday season? And you're a mainstream moviegoer, I would skip this one. I really would. There are a lot of other things to see. But we'll talk about that. Now, again, the good stuff is good when it's good. And I think that's what helps the movie cross the finish line for me when I was watching this. Because, again, there are just so many bad things about this movie. And we'll get into it in a second. But, again, there is somewhat of a balance when it comes to tolerance for the movie. So let's talk about what was bad about the film, and then we'll talk about what was good. So what's bad about it? Well, again, inorganic, desperate, and very frustrating and obvious. There's a lot that goes into that's spoilery, but we'll talk about the spoiler-free stuff. So one of the things that I don't like about this movie is that Star Wars has always been very formulaic because it's a Disney property. But what makes Marvel and Star Wars different, there are two big properties that are owned by the same company, is that Marvel follows an outline. It also follows an overarching story that serves a bigger purpose. Star Wars did not do that. I mean, it didn't do it the whole trilogy, but here is where it gets rough because they take all of the storylines that they abandoned in The Last Jedi that were introduced in Force Awakens, and they try to shoehorn all that into this movie, and it just does not work. I mean, here, if you're gonna shoehorn all of those storylines in, they need to be at least good, and they weren't even that good at all. I mean, when I was watching this, I was like, oh yeah, they brought that storyline back, but they didn't improve it or make it as good as how they introduced it. It was just flat. I mean, throughout the whole movie, I was like, yeah, they didn't need that. It was a time waster, and I think that was a problem. Certain storylines, actually. And then they would introduce new storylines with new characters that they would plant in here, which the characters were great. I mean, they were great starters. But again, it just didn't go anywhere. It was flat, and it was a time waster. And we'll talk about that when we get into the spoiler half, because I don't want to give anything away. So yeah, I mean, it was just problematic from the get-go when they had to pick up those storylines from the first movie, which again, they got rid of in the second one. So it just didn't make sense to me. I was like, this is just weird. But that's one of the problems that I had with this movie, is that it doesn't follow any sort of outline. And there was an outline in Force Awakens, but I think, again, it was just so trashed on by Rian Johnson and abandoned that when they tried to pick it back up here, it just didn't work. I wish they would have diverted it and did something a little different, or maybe rewrote some things and just kind of left it as it was. I don't know why they had to try and pick all of it back up. I would have just liked it if they would have ignored it instead of just trying to place it back where it was, because it just didn't work. It was terrible. We'll talk about some of those things in the spoiler half of what I'm talking about, but that's an idea. That's the gist of what they did. So next, one thing I don't like about this movie is that it's very disrespectful to Star Wars lore. There's one thing that everyone knows about that's in Star Wars lore. It's a common thread of Star Wars. I can't tell you what it is without spoiling it, but it's out throughout the whole movie. They do this. It's really annoying. But they take something that's so sacred to Star Wars as lore, as their storyline, and they just crap all over it. It was so annoying. There was this one character that was using this sacred part of their lore, of the storyline, right, throughout the whole movie, and it just didn't make any sense. And I was like, that's not how it works. You can't do that. It's very specific. It's a very specific part of Star Wars that they were trying to use. They were using, and it didn't make any sense. It didn't support the story. So I just didn't like that. Also, there are parts of this movie between character interactions. There are specific characters in general. I'm not going to spoil what's a part of these conversations, but most of it is Carrie Fisher's Leia, which is not her fault because she passed unfortunately before this movie was being made. But it's not just that situation. There are other character interactions that are so disjointed and so awkward and weird that it's like, why did you even put that in there if you're not going to resolve it later? It just doesn't make sense to me. So it's kind of all over the place when it comes to that as well. So overall, I think those are some of the big problems when it comes to this movie. Now, there are other problems that I had, like, for example, the third act. I had problems with that, but those are just kind of like nitpicky to me. And then there's this one scene at the end of the movie that was so frustrating. I literally almost screamed, like, internally. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. It's just so frustrating that after all what they did in this movie with the certain storyline, that they would do that scene and kind of like just trash what they had came up with. It didn't make any sense. It was weird. Again, I can't really give a lot away without spoiling it. But yeah, it had to do with Rey at the end of the movie. There was a huge Rey scene at the end of the movie that was just so annoying. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. It's like really frustrating. Okay, so that's what's bad with the movie. What's good with the movie? Well, when the movie's good, it's good, like I said. And that has to do with character interactions that are not the ones that I said didn't work. There are those character interactions that don't work, but there are some that do work. So, for example, I really loved Kylo Ren and Rey. I thought that those character interactions, that pair, was fantastic. Their Force bond that they introduced in The Last Jedi, that was like probably one of the best things about that movie. But here, if I turn it up to an 11, and it's fantastic. I'm like, yes, this is what you should have been doing all along. And then there's another pair that I really liked, which was Finn and Poe. That pairing is incredible. I mean, I think this is really the secret sauce here were these two pairs. They really should have been doing this with Finn and Poe way earlier into the franchise, like into the trilogy. So I don't know why they didn't do that, but here it was fantastic. I was like, this is what we needed. And those pairs really embody what it means to have Star Wars characters, to watch Star Wars characters. I also really loved Rey, Finn, and Poe as a trinity, because, again, it reminds me a lot of what Star Wars started out like with the original trilogy. So it worked out really well. You can't go wrong with a good trinity. DC's got a trinity, Marvel's got a trinity, Harry Potter's got a trinity. You just can't go wrong with it. So those character interactions in general, that's what was really good about the movie. Also, the cinematography. Star Wars movies look amazing, and this movie also has a good look to it. Especially, there's a planet, I can't tell you much about it without spoiling it, but there's a planet in the third act that it's just set up so well. Like, it looks great, and it's part of the third act battle, right? I'm not going to tell you anything about it because, again, spoilers, but it was just amazing to look at. It was so pretty. I was like, and the way that they incorporated, like, the environment and, like, the weather of that planet I was like, it's really cool. I'll tell you more about it in the spoiler half if you've seen the movie, but you already know what I'm talking about, but it was really great. So yeah, Star Wars just looks amazing. It always does. And I think that's what is great about these movies, that they immerse you into the world that you are watching, because the scenery is just excellent. So I really liked that quite a bit. So those are the two things that I really think were home runs that the movie did, were those pairings and character interactions, and then just the way the movie looks, the way it plays out physically. It just looks great, and I really enjoyed watching it as they went from mission to mission, or I guess plot point to plot point in terms of where they were in the movie. Okay, so overall, I would say that if you are a Star Wars fan, you do need to see this movie, because it wraps up the chapter quite nicely. The third act, after it's done, it's celebratory, it's positive, and I think, again, it just embodies what Star Wars is. That part of the third act where it finishes the battle, it was great. And I think that, again, it wraps up this trilogy quite nicely, the First Order storyline that we've been following for the last 3 films. So I would definitely see it for that. If you're a mainstream moviegoer, maybe not. I think you could wait till it came out on streaming, especially if you have Disney Plus and it comes out later on down the pipeline in Disney Plus. I think people would really enjoy watching it on there at home. So yeah, that's what I think of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker in terms of non-spoilers. Okay, now we're going to go into spoilers. Are you ready? Okay, you're still here? We start now. Okay, so spoilers. Let's go back to the bad portion of the movie. So what did I not like about this movie? Again, it's disingenuous, it's inorganic, it's desperate, with certain storylines that they try to shoehorn back in. So, for example, I really hated that the Knights of Ren were in this movie. I mean, it was so annoying. I was like, okay, I get it. We had them in the first movie, but they didn't add anything to the storyline at all. I mean, I guess it was kind of cool when Kylo Ren had a fight scene with them towards the end in the third act, when he was trying to reach Rey with Palpatine. But I was like, it's not as good. I mean, I really liked when they were fighting against Snoke's men in The Last Jedi. That lightsaber battle, that fight scene, that was where it was at. The Knights of Ren were just lame. Also, they just walked around and didn't really do anything. They were there to look cool. They were like a posse. I just never thought they were actually threatening at all throughout the entire film. It was just really annoying. Also, they tried to shoehorn in, like, risks, quote-unquote risks with this movie, like the Chewbacca scene with killing him off, and then they were like, JK, he's still alive. I was like, that's not good storytelling. I mean, I think that I when I saw that scene, I thought, wow, the movie really went there. I mean, it kind of broke from the formula in a way by doing that. And then when they were like, oh, Chewie's not dead, he's actually still alive, I was like, okay, it's just they never take a risk here, and I think that they were close to doing that multiple times. Again, C-3PO, that's another storyline in this movie where I was like, wow, they really went there. I mean, they just take it back. It was too much. It was kind of like Whiplash in terms of like how a storyline went in the movie, and I couldn't take it seriously. It was really annoying. And then also they shoehorn, there is a couple at the end of the movie during like the whole celebration. It's like, I guess it's General Leia's, like, I guess second in command or something. I don't know who she is, but she had a line in the movie. I think she was in the last movie too, but she has a wife, or maybe like a girlfriend or fiance or whatever, and they share a kiss in the celebration, like, oh, we defeated the Final Order, right, throughout that whole thing. But the way that it planned out, right, the way that they made it just like a second, right, it's like a split second you see them. It's just really bad towards representation. I think Disney fans have been so mad about Disney doing this. They've done it with LeFou, they've done it with Elsa, they've done it with so many people, like so many characters, especially recently. And the fact that they would take that relationship here and plan it in the third act as like a split-second thing and not actually address who was obviously supposed to be the main LGBT character, Finn. I mean, it was so obvious in this movie. The fact that they diverted from that and did what they did in the third act, it just made no sense to me. I was like, do you even watch your own movie? Like, really? I mean, it was really frustrating. I also, again, the character interactions between Finn and Rey. Like, when Finn was like, I have to tell you something before we die. I mean, we never found out what that was. I think it was, he's either in love with Rey or he's in love with Poe. It's one of the two things. And that's why he wouldn't say it when Poe was around. So I don't know if that's what it was. Who knows? But the fact that they didn't even finish it, the fact that they just left that there, they left it hanging. I was like, you're not going to get another movie to talk about this. You better just tell us now. It was like, what? Like, it was just weird. It was confusing. So yeah, I mean, also the character interactions with Leia. Again, I know that it was unfortunate that Carrie Fisher couldn't record anything for this movie, but they used previous recordings from movies that she did previously, and then wrote dialogue around them. It was bad dialogue. I mean, it was not good. It was flat. It didn't really serve a purpose, and it made the beginning of the movie feel rushed. And I think that, I understand that there really wasn't much they could do with that, but I would have tested it with different dialogue. I would have wrote different scenes and tested it and see. I would have saw which one did the best, because this one just didn't. Again, it was really rushed, and I think it was just because they didn't want to CGI anymore of Carrie Fisher in here, because you could totally tell it wasn't real. So that was frustrating. And then I really just, I feel like the movie does this on multiple points, but I feel like it doesn't trust itself with certain storylines, because there's too many storylines. I feel like they couldn't really push themselves like with the new characters. There were 2 new female characters here, and they were both really good female characters, but they couldn't really trust in that and focus on that because there's just so much going on. They had to wrap up the original 3 with Harrison Ford, right? Which we'll talk about Harrison Ford in a second. But Harrison Ford comes back as Han Solo. Luke is here. Luke has a scene here, and then of course the Leia stuff they had to digitally put in. And then they have the current Trinity, right? They have Rey, Finn, and Poe. Then they have these new characters. Then they have everything with Kylo Ren going on. Then they have Palpatine. It's just too much. I mean, there was too much going on. And at times it was just, again, whiplash for the viewer to watch. And so I just didn't think it worked. It was ultimately jagged as a storyline. And I think that it just didn't work as the finale. If they would have maybe done this in the first movie, I would have been able to understand. I was like, okay, if this is the first movie, fine, whatever, they'll fix it in the next one. But they don't have another chance to do that, so it was really annoying here. I really loved Rey as a Palpatine. I found that was one of my favorite parts of this movie, is that they explored who Rey was even further with Rey Palpatine. And I really do like that Palpatine made a comeback, because he was a really good villain here. I was like, man, I love Palpatine. I didn't like so much that it was like, oh, Snoke was never real. He was an illusion. I created him. I was like, lame. But I think that everything with Palpatine at the end, especially with the whole lightning show that he put on, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. But again, they rip off Avengers Endgame there, when he's like, I am all the Sith, and she's like, and I am all the Jedi. I was like, okay, Robert Downey Jr. already did that. So again, it just didn't work for me. So they totally ripped off Endgame there. But I did really like, again, exploring who Rey is, exploring the Palpatine line, exploring the lore of the Sith. Speaking of lore, by the way, like earlier when I mentioned they took part of the lore and just crapped all over it. I don't understand how Finn has the Force. Like, he can sense people, but he can't use the Force. But he can, like, tap into it. That's just not how it works. I was like, I don't understand that. So that was really annoying. And I think that it's weird that nobody else could do that. I was like, so can Poe do that too? Or is it just Finn? I don't understand. And then, like, because I guess they kind of psyched us out in the first movie where they were like, oh, Finn's the main lead. And it ended up being Rey, right? She's the Jedi, right? But I just never thought that Finn could tap into the Force. And again, if he can do it, can everybody do it? Or is it just him? And then, with Leia too, like Force training, I don't know. It was just weird. I just never understood. Because I thought that they explained the Force training with Leia so well. And with Luke training Leia then training Rey now. That to have the Force kind of like as a thing that everybody can tap into with Finn and on the side, I was like, that just doesn't make sense. So I wasn't a fan of that. And I think, again, it crapped all over the lore of what the Force is, because that's just not the case. So it was too hard to ignore that. It was really weird. And then when he was like, you have to trust in the Force to that one girl that they met on, with the Death Star, right? And she was like, I don't even know if the Force is real. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, it's pretty real. I mean, you're with a Jedi, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It was all weird. I was like, no, I'm not buying any of this. So that was a problem as well. And then finally, one thing that I really hated, this, again, I mentioned this earlier in the non-spoiler half. One thing I really hated is that at the end, when Rey's in Tatooine burying her lightsabers, which I was like, I don't know if I'd bury those in the sand, because they're not going to work later on if another Jedi has to find those. But when she was burying those lightsabers, and the girl was like, who are you? And she's like, I'm Rey Skywalker. Wrong. I was like, that's so lame. I was like, if you're going to be if you're going to change the Palpatine line to align with the Jedi, you better freaking own it, right? I'm like, you better call yourself Rey Palpatine. I mean, I understand that it's probably not a name you want to call yourself in front of people that hate Palpatine because he was the Emperor, but you better freaking own that name, or else just be Rey. Like, I don't care. But the fact that she steals the Skywalker name, I know that she was blessed with it by Leia and Luke, like, they're ghosts, right? But I don't care. I mean, it's just really, it was it was too Mary Sue, because she is still, I mean, Rey is a Mary Sue character. She's such a Mary Sue. But that part really aggravated me, that even though she's a Mary Sue, she had great moments in this movie, and Daisy Ridley was fantastic. But to do that, put that on top of all of it, just makes her too extra of a character. It's like too much. I'm like, okay, we get it. She's a Mary Sue character. And Daisy Ridley is fine as her. She does a really good performance in this film. But the fact that they take the Skywalker name, again, it's just crapping all over the lore. It's ridiculous. So I didn't find that fun either. I just thought that was a terrible storyline. Now, things I did love about this movie, in terms of spoilers, I loved the Rey and Kylo Ren stuff, especially when she's on the ship with the Darth Vader helmet and he finds out throughout their Force communication. I thought that was pretty cool. I mean, that was my favorite scene, one of my favorite scenes. Anytime it was Rey versus Kylo Ren, the lightsaber battle on the bridge, right, with the waves, and they were jumping over the waves, I was like, that's pretty freaking cool. Like, anything with that was great. I thought the Finn and Poe stuff was great. So that stuff really, really, really worked for me. I thought that was excellent. And then when Harrison Ford comes back, I love that they were able to bring Kylo Ren back. I thought it was kind of funny how Harrison Ford's always like, I don't want to be in this franchise anymore, but he just comes back because they probably offered him a lot of money. But I did love that they were able to bring him back, and that there really was a high-stakes situation there. He did lose his life. He brought Rey back with the Force, but then in turn lost his own. I think that was like very honorable to do. I'm glad that it wasn't necessarily a full-on happy ending, but I'm also glad that they were still able to find a positive outcome out of that, because that was a huge deal. And I totally bought that. I totally bought their relationship. I thought that was one of the things that the movie did get very well organically. And Finn and Poe, again, that pairing, and then Trinity in general. Both Trinities, the old Trinity and the new one. I thought that they did really well with honoring those. So, even though they had bumps along the way, they still, again, pulled it off quite nicely. When the movie was good, it was really good. Those are my favorite parts, for sure. So overall, I think that there is definitely a lot of bad when it comes to this film, but I also think that there was enough good that it pulled me through. And I think that Star Wars is still a redeemable property, but I think Disney should definitely take a break and reevaluate what they want to do here, because they've crapped all over this franchise. So I would really take a minute and take a breather and maybe try to get some new blood into the Star Wars franchise, because if they don't, I think Kathleen Kennedy's just going to frankly run it into the ground more than she already has. So it is a problem, but I think Disney, I hope they're on the way to fixing it. We'll see how that goes. But what did you guys think of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker? Are you guys fans of this movie? Or did you agree with me that it's just non-organic? It's just very desperate, in my opinion. But did you agree with that? So thank you guys for watching this review. Don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe, and I will see you guys later in the next video. Bye-bye.